You may proceed.
Hello, I have Counselor Roberts for the plaintiff. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, whichever it is where you are. And I may need some pronunciation, Venezia.
Venezia.
I'm going to work on that one, I promise. Thank you for being gracious with me. Well, it is good to see both of you this morning. What I would like to do is begin by having each party make introductions, and then we will proceed with pretrial matters from the plaintiff at that time. So I am excited to be here. Let's have a great fun round. So Counselor Roberts, if you could proceed with introducing your counsel to the full bench, that would be appreciated.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning. My name is Maggie Roberts. I'm joined today with my co-counsel, Ms. Abby Hahn.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
And Mr. Jeff Ecker.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And together we represent the plaintiff in today's case, Mr. Trey Westermeyer.
Okay. Good morning, Counselor Roberts, Hahn, and Ecker. We will hear from you briefly. Counselor Venezia?
Yes.
Is that close? Okay, excellent.
Good morning. My name is Mia Venezia, and along with my co-counsel, Mr. Harrison DeVoe.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Who will be delivering the opening statement, and Mr. Jack Shea.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon. It is lovely to meet all three of you, and we will also hear from you briefly. So thank you.
Your Honor, permission to proceed with pretrial matters?
Yes, please do.
First, we'd like the court to note that we will be suing Ms. Walton today for the breach of implied warranty of habitability. Next, Your Honor, as this is not a bifurcated case, we will be pursuing punitive damages in the amount of no less than $500,000 on behalf of the plaintiff, Mr. Westermeyer. Next, Your Honor, we'd like to draw your attention to a specific piece of case law, Kaplan v. Sikora. Your Honor, this case law simply states that anyone under the employment of the defendant, Ms. Walton, will not be considered hearsay under the rule of 801(d)(2). And then finally, Your Honor, we'd just like to ask your preferences for sharing our screen with exhibits. Would you like us to ask permission or simply let the record reflect?
My preference would be just to let the record reflect.
Yes, Your Honor. With that, the plaintiff is ready to proceed to openings.
Okay, very good. Counselor Venezia.
Yes, we have a few housekeeping matters as well.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Because of the specific rules of the Midlands jurisdiction, specifically Rule 608A, we're not permitted to call rebuttal witnesses. Because of that, we have here a notice of intent to offer character evidence that's been seen and signed by both parties. Permission to virtually tender that to the bench?
You may. Are you going to screen share that so that the entire bench can see that?
I can, if Your Honor would like.
That would be preferred, just so that all the judges can see that.
Absolutely, Your Honor. Give me one moment. Now, is Your Honor able to see my screen?
Yes.
So this is the notice of intent to offer character evidence that's been seen and signed by both parties.
Okay. Very good. Hearing no comment from Counselor Roberts, you may proceed.
I'd also like to draw your attention to specific case law, specifically, if I may share my screen again, Your Honor.
Please.
This first case law, Shaw v. Sinowski, which outlines the first four elements that the plaintiff has to prove in today's case: entry into a lease, subsequent development of dangerous or unsanitary conditions, reasonable notice of those defects to the landlord, and failure of the landlord to restore the premises to habitability. Now, there's an additional fifth element that the plaintiff has to prove that's outlined in this case law, Pryor v. Eslick, and it states that the tenant must prove that they don't bear primary responsibility for the development of those dangerous or unsanitary conditions. Now, like Ms. Roger mentioned, Roberts mentioned, because this trial isn't bifurcated, those first 5 elements have to be proven by a preponderance of the evidence, while in order to establish punitive damages, the burden is by clear and convincing evidence.
The court will take note. Counselor Roberts, I assume you have no comment or clarification to provide the court?
Yes, Your Honor, the plaintiff has no objections to these case laws.
And with that, Your Honor, the defense is ready to proceed to opening statements.
Okay, very good. Plaintiff, you may proceed with opening statements when you are ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Before I begin, can you hear and see me okay?
I can. Thank you for checking.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. The landlord didn't listen. It's November of 2018, and Trey Westermeyer is helping his 7-year-old daughter get ready for school. But rather than reaching for a t-shirt or her favorite skirt, Mr. Westermeyer hands his daughter a long sleeve shirt and pants that cover her legs entirely. He knows she doesn't want the other kids at school to see the bug bites that cover her entire body. Today, you're gonna meet Mr. Westermeyer. Learn he signed a lease at Lakeside Apartments, moved in with his daughter, and within a month, the two began itching. They were getting bit all over. Their apartment had become infested with bed bugs. And you'll learn, no matter what Mr. Westermeyer said, the landlord didn't listen. She didn't do anything to fix the problem. And the judge will tell you in Midlands, that's against the law. The landlord has to listen. See, when an apartment becomes uninhabitable, unlivable, and it's not the tenant's fault, the landlord is legally obligated to step in and do something about the problem. That's why Trey Westermeyer is suing the landlord at Lakeside Apartments, Miss Kieran Walton, for breach of the implied warranty of habitability. And that suit can be broken down into 3 things. First, bed bugs made Mr. Westermeyer's apartment unlivable. Second, someone else is responsible for that infestation. And lastly, the landlord's response was unreasonable. Now, because this is a civil suit, we'll prove each of those things to you by a preponderance of the evidence, which simply means more likely than not. And to do so, we're going to ask you to keep 3 questions in mind. What happened to Mr. Westermeyer? Where did the bed bugs come from? And why was the landlord's response unreasonable? Let's start with that first question. What happened to Mr. Westermeyer? You're going to meet him today. Learn he's a single father who wants nothing more than a good life for his daughter. You'll learn that after he told the landlord about the bed bug issue, it was never fixed. The problem, it never went away. He was spending so much money on bug sprays and clothes for his daughter that he couldn't make rent. And when he asked Miss Walton for reduced rent on account of those bed bugs, she evicted him from Lakes. So where did the bed bugs come from? See, in order for Miss Walton to be found liable, the bed bugs had to come from someone other than Mr. Westermeyer. Well, you're going to hear from an entomologist today. He's going to tell you that the most likely source of those bed bugs wasn't Mr. Westermeyer, but the unit next door. That's where the bed bugs came from. Which brings us to that last question. Why was the landlord's response unreasonable? Well, this entomologist is going to tell you today that the best response to those bed bugs would have been a high intensity heat treatment. And you'll learn today, well, that's not how Miss Walton chose to treat the bed bugs. Lakeside's former head of maintenance will tell you today they sprayed Mr. Westermeyer's unit once. And when they did, they used a spray that you'll learn was anything but sufficient. Members of the jury, signing a lease is not a formality. It's a legally binding document, an agreement between you and your landlord that if something goes wrong and it's not your fault, they'll step in and fix it. So that's why at the end of today's trial, we'll come before you again and remind you that in Trey Westermeyer's case, Ms. Walton broke this agreement. She didn't fulfill her responsibilities. The landlord didn't listen. And we'll ask you to find Ms. Walton liable and award Trey Westermeyer the damages that he's owed. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Hahn. Is there an opening statement from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Before I begin, can you hear and see me okay?
Yes, sir.
Wonderful.
You may proceed.
Selling a story. The plaintiff, Trey Westermeyer, is selling a story. You see, he's a reporter that moved into Lakeside Apartments back in 2018. And from the first day he moved in, he was looking for a story. One that would get him fame, money, a better job. And when the plaintiff was low on cash and saw his chance, well, he found a story, which is why we're here today. Members of the jury, that story was about Miss Kieran Kai Walton, a proud businesswoman and the owner of Lakeside Apartments. Now, Miss Walton is here today to tell you that when she first heard about the plaintiff's complaints about bed bugs, she not only listened, she took it seriously. But after months of trying to help and after months of no evidence, Miss Walton will tell you that she realized the plaintiff was just selling a story. Members of the jury, in today's trial, the plaintiff has a burden to prove that story. You see, they brought a lawsuit against Miss Walton for breach of contract, which in this case is a lease agreement signed and approved by both parties. And now when you sign a lease, there's something known as implied warranty of habitability, which just means that the landlord promises to keep the apartment livable. It's the plaintiff's job in today's case to prove that wasn't what happened. They have to prove first that there was a development of unsanitary conditions that affected the life, health, and safety of the plaintiff. They have to prove second that there was reasonable notice of the conditions given to the landlord, Miss Walton. And third, they have to prove that Miss Walton failed to restore the apartment back to livable conditions. Now they have to prove all of that to you by what's known as a preponderance of the evidence, which just means more likely than not. But members of the jury, that burden will not be met because the plaintiff's story, it just doesn't add up. You see, other than the plaintiff's word, you won't see or hear evidence that there was ever a bed bug infestation inside the plaintiff's apartment. Blaine Crawford, an exterminator hired by Miss Walton to address any bed bug issues, will take the stand. Now, Mr. Crawford will tell you that he tried month after month to inspect the plaintiff's apartment, but the plaintiff never let him in. And you'll find out why. Because when Mr. Crawford was finally able to inspect that apartment, there were no signs, there were no evidence of bed bugs. But it's important to remember that before the exterminators ever arrived, and before Miss Walton ever found out, the plaintiff had a plan. You see, Jesse Rogers, the property manager at Lakeside, will tell you about that plan. He will tell you that weeks before there was a bed bug complaint, the plaintiff was planning a story about Miss Walton. story that the plaintiff told Mr. Rogers would take Miss Walton down and make money in the process. The plaintiff is selling a story, which is why at the end of this trial, we ask that you look at the facts over the fiction. Find Kai Walton not liable. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor DeVoe. Would the plaintiff like to proceed with their first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Trey Westermeyer to the stand.
Seeing as I have two counselors on the screen and a witness, you may proceed.
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Good afternoon. The name's Trey Westermeyer.
Where are you from, Mr. Westermeyer?
Right here in Midlands, born and raised.
Do you have any family here in Midlands?
Not much. It's just me and my daughter, Kim. My father also lives here. We're actually living with him right now. My wife passed away a few years ago, so he's been helping out with, babysitting my daughter and balancing my work and everything like that too.
What do you do for work?
I picked up a writing gig a few years ago. It's not much, but it's cash, so it works out.
When you started that job, where were you living at the time?
That was about 3 years ago now in the fall. I moved into Lakeside Apartments at the time.
I'd like to talk more about Lakeside Apartments. Why'd you choose that place?
Well, new job, had me booking it all over Midlands, and I needed someplace close to the kindergarten so I could pick my daughter Kimmy up after school, and I couldn't afford the after school program or nothing, right? So, Lakeside, it was right there, right next to it, and it was cheap. So it seemed like a good opportunity at the time.
Did you sign a lease with Lakeside?
Yeah, I did.
Your Honor, will now be displaying Exhibit 1. What are we looking at here, Mr. Westermeyer?
This is the lease agreement that I signed with the landlord when I moved into Lakeside.
Plaintiff offers Exhibit 1.
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 1 will be admitted.
Who's the landlord at Lakeside Apartments?
It was owned by a Kieran Walton. I think she went by Kai.
And Mr. Westermeyer, who signed this lease agreement?
Well, if you look on the right-hand side here, you can see Miss Kieran Walton. She signed above, and my signature is right underneath.
So can you tell the jury about your apartment at Lakeside?
Sure. We lived in apartment number 10, 2-bedroom. Kimmy could finally get her own privacy. She was able to put up, her Justin Bieber posters or whatever. Small bathroom, nothing special.
Any problems with the apartment?
It was okay at first, but soon after we started noticing some problems in my daughter's bedroom.
What do you mean?
There was this little vent right next to apartment 11 in Kimmy's bedroom. We started noticing all these little strange smells coming out of it.
Any other issues?
Oh yeah. Soon after, started noticing all these little, brown spots on Kimmy's bed and all these bite marks all over her legs and body, right? I figure it's just from playing outside at recess or whatever at school. So at the time, I just gave her some lotion and hoped it would work out.
Did you ever experience the same kind of problems as your daughter?
Yeah. It was about a week later. I started noticing all the same bite marks on my legs. I wasn't outside playing at recess or nothing, right? So I figured it had to be bed bugs. And in fact, I even found a bed bug in our apartment.
Your Honor, we'll now be displaying Exhibit 2. What's this a picture of, Mr. Westermeyer?
That's the photo I took of the bed bug that I found at our place at Lakeside.
Plaintiff offers Exhibit 2, and pursuant to stipulation number 9, both sides agree that this was a bed bug found in Mr. Westermeyer's apartment during his stay at Lakeside.
I assume there's no objection from the defense?
No objection to Exhibit 2, Your Honor.
Okay, exhibit 2 shall be admitted.
Mr. Westermeyer, what happened once you realized you had a bed bug problem?
Well, I emailed the landlord right away. I knew we had to get the problem fixed as soon as possible.
How'd your landlord respond?
I remember she showed up later that night, banging on the door. I open it, but immediately she starts accusing me of bringing the bed bugs in from some type of motel or whatever. It was ridiculous. We ended our conversation right then and there when she said she'd have her people take care of the bed bug issue.
I'd like to break this interaction down some more. You said your landlord accused you of bringing in bed bugs from a motel. Did you travel a lot for work?
Yeah, all the time. My coworkers and I, we travel all over to hotels and motels, for the purposes of writing our work. Yes.
Did any of your coworkers ever tell you that they got bed bugs?
No, never.
You also said that your landlord would take care of the problem. Did she?
No, next day, these two people, come up to the door saying that they're to, do some spraying or inspection, for maintenance. But I told them it wasn't a good time, so I asked them to come back another time.
Why didn't you let them into your apartment that next morning?
Well, Kimmy was using the bathroom, and when she's coming out and in a towel or whatever, I didn't want some strangers in there, doing their thing while she's coming out. And on top of that, I didn't want some guys, spraying in there while me and Kimmy was still at home. I needed time to take it, to my father's place so we could plan ahead, and I just didn't have time for that.
Did your landlord ever end up fixing that bed bug problem?
No, I remember later on some exterminator came by and said he was going to do some type of inspection. The inspection took 5 minutes. 5 minutes later, the exterminator's gone, but the bed bugs, they stayed.
How'd the bed bugs affect your daughter?
I can't even imagine what she was going through, I mean, her whole body's getting bitten up. She can't hang out with her friends, not having a mother around, and me always, trying to work. And eventually we hit a breaking point. At one point I had to tell her, she couldn't live with me no more, and I had to send her to my father's place. And just like that, my daughter was gone.
Mr. Westermeyer, when your daughter moved out, how did that affect you?
Having to sit Kimmy down and tell her that she couldn't live with daddy no more was, let's just say it just weighed down on me, and dealing with that and dealing with, trying to make the lease payments. Nothing was going right.
You mentioned lease payments. While you had bed bugs, were you still paying rent?
Yeah, I couldn't believe it, but yeah, I was paying as much as I could.
Were you ever evicted from Lakeside Apartments?
Yeah. After 8 months of basically being eaten alive by those bugs, I was evicted entirely.
Why were you evicted from Lakeside?
It was because of the bed bugs. Listen, I was buying Kim all these clothes, buying all these bug sprays, but most of all, I was sending my father all this money so he could take care of Kimmy, It all added up, and soon enough, I was broke, just like that.
Excuse me, Your Honor. I had an objection to lack of personal knowledge.
So what specific testimony or what question were you objecting to?
The question I had objected to was why Mr. Westermeyer got evicted. He wouldn't have knowledge as to that. And after hearing the answer that he got evicted because of bed bugs, there's no way that Mr. Westermeyer could have known that.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may. And Counselor Venecia, I apologize. I don't think I heard you say objection. So I apologize if I missed that.
No worries, Your Honor. This online format is difficult when it comes to things like objections.
Counselor Ecker, you may respond.
Yes, Your Honor. There's no issue due to a lack of personal knowledge. Mr. Westermeyer knows how much he paid in rent to the landlord. And if I may proffer what my next question is going to be.
You may.
I'm going to ask Mr. Westermeyer if the landlord ever told him why he was evicted. And he's going to tell us that the landlord told us it was because he wasn't paying rent. And then he just told the jury why he wasn't able to pay rent. He certainly has personal knowledge as to why he's not able to pay rent.
Counselor Venezia, do you have any further response?
Yes, Your Honor. The question that was asked was, why were you evicted? The answer that was given was because of bed bugs. If Mr. Ecker wants to lay the foundation of what Ms. Walton allegedly said in regards to why Mr. Westermeyer was evicted, that would be fine. But for Mr. Westermeyer to speculate as to the reason he got evicted was bed bugs would be outside the scope of his knowledge.
I think the objection is well noted. Given that we're past the testimony right now, I'm not entirely certain how to cure that. But we will note the objection for the record. If there is a response in which Mr. Westenmeyer said because of bed bugs, I'll strike that from the record, but I apologize, without a court reporter, it's a little tricky for me to track that. So I suppose I'm sustaining the objection if the record reflects that. Counselor Ecker, however, it sounds like you have some follow-up questions anyway that will establish the testimony you're seeking to provide to the jury. So you may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Westermeyer, did your landlord ever tell you why you were evicted?
Yes. She said it was on account of, me not being able to make the rent payments.
Did you ever tell your landlord why you weren't able to pay rent?
Yeah, I did. I remember I asked for reduced rent on account of those bed bugs, never being fixed.
How'd your landlord respond?
I remember she said, "I'll have your locks changed if you don't make the rent. Bed bugs or not, I don't care."
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Westermeyer. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Counselor Ecker. You may proceed with cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Westenmeyer, you're a journalist.
I am, yes.
Part of your work requires travel.
Absolutely, yes.
Part of that travel requires staying in motels.
Yes.
You were looking for a way to stop staying in those motels.
I'm not sure how you mean.
You felt that there had to be money in the budget for you to stay at a nicer place.
Sure, every now and then it would have been nice to stay at a little bit less of a dingy place, sure.
You wrote an email to your boss asking for this.
At one point I did, yes.
You'd recognize that email if I were to show it to you.
I would.
Let the record reflect I'm currently screen sharing what's been previously marked as Exhibit 6. Mr. Westenmeyer, are you able to see my screen okay?
Yes, I can, yeah.
This is the email that you wrote to your boss asking to stay at a nicer hotel, correct?
Right.
It hasn't been changed or altered in any way since the last time you saw it.
No, not that I can tell, no.
Defense offers Exhibit 6 into evidence.
Are there any objections?
Yes, Your Honor. Hearsay to one specific portion of this email, if I may be heard.
You may.
We're fine with the rest of these statements coming in as they're Mr. Westermeyer's words, but specifically the last sentence of that first paragraph, I even heard someone in the lobby say something about bed bugs to the hotel manager. That portion is hearsay, and we ask that that part is redacted from this email.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
We're not using that statement for the truth of the matter asserted. As a matter of fact, we don't believe there were bed bugs in the motel or that Mr. Westenmeyer had bed bugs. We're using this statement for the effect that it had on the listener, that after Mr. Westermeyer heard something about bed bugs, he came up with an idea to accuse Miss Walton of having an apartment infested with bed bugs. It was the effect of this statement that caused him to write his story.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
I don't believe Ms. Venezia is going to be able to lay a connection between that specific statement and an effect that it had on Mr. Westermeyer. If I may proffer.
You may.
If Miss Venezia asks Mr. Westermeyer, he'll tell the jury that he never actually wrote a story, so there's no effect in that regards. And given that Pryor v. Eslick specifically requires the plaintiff to prove that we are not primarily responsible for this infestation, there's too great of a risk that the jury will take this statement for its truth value, implying that there's a relationship between this motel and bed bugs. So we just ask that that statement is redacted from this email.
Anything further, Counselor Venezia?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense does not contend that this motel had bed bugs. The defense does not contend that Mr. Westermeyer picked up bed bugs from this hotel and brought it to Lakeside. Because it's our contention, there were no bed bugs at all. This is not going for the truth of the matter. It's going for the effect that it had on the listener, and I believe that foundation can be laid.
There is excellent argument on behalf of both parties. I am going to overrule the objection only because Ms. Venezia represented to me that at no time is the defense or that the defense's argument, her representation regarding the defense's argument regarding bed bugs. If at any time argument steers from that, Counselor Ecker, I would encourage you or your counsel to revisit this issue. And I may consider striking at that point. You may proceed. And the exhibit will be admitted as presented.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Mr. Westenmeyer, in this email you say you heard something about hotels. You heard something about bed bugs spoken to the hotel manager, correct?
That's right. Somebody in the hallway was saying something about that. Yeah.
And it was after you heard that bit about bed bugs that you had an idea.
I'm not sure how you mean.
If you needed to scrounge up money, you'd write a story on your landlord.
Miss Kieran, she's a billionaire and well-known person in the area. I figure if I could write a nice biography on it, that would be, bring in a lot of readership. Absolutely.
Let the record reflect I'm no longer sharing my screen. Now, it was after you sent that email that you accused Miss Walton of having an apartment infested with bed bugs.
My apartment was infested with bed bugs, yes.
It was after you sent that email that you allegedly saw signs of bed bugs.
It was almost a month later, but yeah.
Now, as a journalist, you know that when you write a story, you need evidence.
Sure, absolutely.
You need proof.
Sometimes, yes.
So I want to talk about the evidence we have in this case. On direct examination, you mentioned that you and your daughter suffered from bed bug bites.
That's right.
We didn't see any photographs of those bug bites.
No, I didn't take any photographs of my daughter's legs, no.
Didn't take any photographs of your own bug bites.
No, I did not.
We also didn't see any medical records of you getting those bug bites treated.
No.
Mr. Westenmeyer, as a journalist, you've been wanting to break a big story for a while now.
That's not true. No, any story that comes along is great for me. Yes.
Breaking a big story was how you were going to provide for your daughter?
It could have helped, sure.
Breaking a big story was how you were going to stop staying in those motels we mentioned earlier.
Not necessarily, but I'm sure it would have helped, sure.
The big story that you picked was about your landlord.
That story never was written, no.
Well, you told Miss Walton you were going to write a story on her.
A nice biography, sure, would have helped. On top of that, making sure the people of Midlands didn't have to suffer through the same bed bugs that I did. I wanted to make sure that it was known, yes.
Mr. Westenmeyer, redirecting you back to my question, you told Miss Walton you were going to write a story on her.
I did.
You told her that once you sold this story, we'd see how long she kept her fortune for.
That's right.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time.
Is there any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. May Mr. Westermeyer be excused?
Yes, he may. Thank you, Counselor Ecker.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Venezia. Does the plaintiff have another witness they would like to call?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Dr. Dennis Howe to the stand.
Seeing that I have two attorneys and one witness, you may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Would you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hi, I'm Dr. Dennis Howe.
What do you do for a living, Dr. Howe?
I'm a professor at Yale University.
What do you teach?
I teach entomology. I'm actually designing a new course right now on my research of bugs burrowing into soil. We call it very groundbreaking stuff.
Well, doctor, what is entomology?
Put simply, entomology is the study of bugs, where they come from, how they grow, and how they tick. Pun intended.
Doctor, can you tell us a bit more about your educational background?
Of course. I received my PhD in entomology from Cornell back in 2007, and then I trained in Duke's Forensic Entomology Lab for additional 7 years to gain more experience.
Well, what do you do as a forensic entomologist?
We call ourselves the CSI of bug infestations. We use our knowledge to look at the nature and severity of an infestation, to determine its origin or where it came from, and how to best treat it.
So is that what you did for today's case?
It is. I was given multiple photos, as well as every available witness statement, to give my opinions on a potential infestation in Trey Westermeyer's apartment.
And what method did you use to come to your conclusions today?
I use the gold standard in forensic entomology. We call it the triple T method. We start by considering the timeline of the infestation, use that to trace back to the original source, and then consider the necessary treatment we would need to eradicate the infestation.
So, doctor, I'd like to take those one at a time. Starting with the timeline, what can you tell us about that?
Well, based on the statements I reviewed, I was made aware of 3 reports of bedbug sightings at the Lakeside Apartments. So I tried to find which apartment they specifically came from in order to trace back to Trey Westermeyer's apartment.
Your Honor, will now be displaying what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 4. Doctor, what are we looking at here?
This is the diagram showing which apartment is next to each other at Lakeside.
Is it fair and accurate?
To my knowledge, yes.
Plaintiff moves Exhibit 4 into evidence, Your Honor.
Any objection?
Without objection, Your Honor.
Thank you, Counselor Shea. Exhibit 4 will be admitted.
So, Dr. Howe, what did this diagram of the apartments tell you?
Well, like I said, I was made aware of 3 instances of bed bugs at Lakeside. There was a report from Unit 12, a report in Unit 10, and then the apartment which I looked at, given him the information as the potential original source, Unit 11.
So, Doctor, how would this get you back to the infestation in Unit 10?
Well, as you can see here, Unit 10 and 11, they share a wall. And I also learned that they shared a wall vent. That's what I honed in on specifically as the potential transmission of bed bugs between the 2.
And doctor, is there any way you can explain this a little bit more for us?
Yes, I know there can be a lot going on here. So I actually did create a digital rendering showing what I believe to be a possible scenario where bed bugs could move from one apartment to another.
Your Honor, we'll now be displaying the demonstrative that Dr. Howe created. So, Doctor,
Objection, Your Honor, to misleading the jury.
Counselor Shea, can you please elaborate?
Yes, Your Honor. Specifically, I'm objecting to the labeling of these 2 renditions of Unit 10 and Unit 11, claiming that they are actually representative of what those units look like. As opposing counsel stated, this is a digital rendering. These are not actual photographs. And Dr. Howe never actually visited these apartments. And as such, it's misleading the jury into believing this is an actual portrayal of these apartments.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, this is not more misleading than probative. We're going to hear that Dr. Howe used the witness statements of Mr. Westermeyer and Mr. Bauer in order to show the relationship of the objects that he's going to put into this digital rendering and exactly where they were based on the testimony in those witness statements. Now, we're not using this rendering to show the exact layout of these apartments or even the exact location of these objects, just rather to show the members of the jury that there was a close relationship between these objects and that wall vent that Dr. Howe was just testifying about. And we'll make it clear to the members of the jury that this demonstration is only showing the possibility of how the bugs could have transmitted from one apartment to the other, not photos of the exact apartments themselves.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, if opposing counsel and Dr. Howe would like to discuss the broad process of how bed bugs can go through vents, they're welcome to do so with this illustration. But to label these apartments as the apartments directly relating to the facts in today's case misleads the jury into believing that this is actually what occurred in these apartments. They can accomplish the exact same thing in this testimony without these misleading labels.
May I briefly respond, Your Honor?
Counselor, just a moment, Counselor Roberts. Counselor Shea, is there something in the photographs that you find to be particularly misleading, or is it just that you don't believe that they're accurate or photographs of the two apartments?
Yes, Your Honor, several things. First, I do believe that these are not accurate portrayals of the actual layout or contents of these apartments. But furthermore, Your Honor, I have seen this visual aid prior to this trial, and I do believe that animations on this visual aid will include bed bugs. And as such, that's misleading the jury to believe that there was actually a transfer of bed bugs between these apartments that Dr. Howe observed.
May I respond to that, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, we're actually going to be showing photographs of specific objects that were near this vent that do show textbook signs of bed bugs, as Dr. Howe will testify. This is not more misleading than probative, Your Honor. It has to substantially outweigh any probative impact that it has. Your Honor, this goes to the weight, not the admissibility of this rendering.
Counselor Roberts, what is the relevance of the photographs if the witness isn't going to testify to what actually happened? What is the relevance of the rendition?
Your Honor, we're going to be showing the objects that are in this rendering. We're actually going to be able to connect those with signs of textbook bed bug symptoms. We're going to show that because they were relatively close to that vent, that vent was actually the source of transportation between these apartments. So it is relevant to show the members of the jury which objects were close to the vent. And these statements themselves do explicitly state that these objects were close to that vent.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Opposing counsel just admitted that they intend to use this visual aid to directly reflect the facts of today's case, which involves the conditions Unit 10 and 11 were in. That is misleading the jury to make them believe that this animated rendering is actually a recounting of events and conditions of these two apartments. Again, without the labels, we're fine with this. We don't believe it's misleading. But if it goes in that direction that opposing counsel just stated, linking it back to these three items, that is directly misleading the members of the jury, directly relating to the facts of today's case.
Counselor Shea, and I apologize, I'm going to throw us off time if I keep asking questions. But do you have reason to believe that the way that the rendition is going to, I assume this is going to develop into something, that the placement that counsel or the witness are going to utilize on the rendition is not an accurate portrayal of the actual placement of the items in the two apartments?
Yes, Your Honor, I do believe that. Dr. Howe has never visited these apartments, and furthermore, the only photographic and visual evidence he has to rely on photos of these apartments are just close-up photos of a mattress, an outlet, and a chair. He has not seen the layout of these apartments, and the only other way he can rely on illustrating that layout would be testimony. So he could not provide a visualization of these apartments if he wanted to. He's never seen them, and as such, we can't be sure that this is the layout of these apartments.
May I briefly respond, Your Honor?
I'm going to overrule the objection. Counselor Shea, I think your argumentation is excellent, and I really look forward to you exploring that with the witness on cross-examination. I also encourage you to listen closely to the testimony that Counselor Robert elicits, and if it in any way strays from the representation she has made to the court, I would encourage you to re-object at that time. But excellent job by both counsel. The objection is overruled at this time. You may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. So Dr. Howe, what objects are we going to see in this rendering?
Well, we're looking at both apartments here. We see the bed and outlet reported in Unit 10 and the vents connecting the two. Now, this bed and outlet were reported by Mr. Westenmeyer to be near that vent, which is why I placed them there. And now in Unit 11, I learned that the tenant brought in several pieces of secondhand furniture, so I placed a couch in that apartment to show that representation as well.
And doctor, for the members of the jury, is this rendering numerically to scale?
Numerically, no. This isn't meant to show an exact layout of both apartments, merely the objects that were reported to be in them, specifically in Unit 10, the relationship of that bed and outlet being close to that vent and how that might affect the infestation that I found.
So walk us through this rendering, doctor.
Well, I learned that after bringing in those pieces of secondhand furniture, the tenant in Unit 11 reported signs of bed bugs. The tenant in Unit 10, Mr. Westenmeyer, reported signs of bed bugs on that bed and outlet, which were near the vent, which is why I honed in on the vent specifically as the mode of transmission of bugs, which could have gone from 11 to 10.
And doctor, is it common for bed bugs to move through vents like that?
Yes, it's incredibly common. Bed bugs are quite the travelers. It's very common for them to move through a vent, slip through the cracks in one side, make it through to a different apartment, and start.
Objection, Your Honor. I would re-raise my misleading objection at this point.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, as it says on the top of the screen, this is a possible infestation scenario. We're not saying that this is exactly what happened. This is exactly how the bed bugs moved. It's based on Dr. Howe's experience and expertise in the field that is allowing him to show what a possible infestation scenario may have looked like.
Counselor Shea, do you have anything further?
Yes, Your Honor. It's the defense's contention in today's trial that there was no bed bug infestation in Unit 10. You heard Dr. Howe say that the only way he got this visualization was from witness statements from Bauer and Mr. Westermeyer. Again, this visualization can in no way reflect Dr. Howe's actual opinions or experiences with these units.
May I briefly respond, Your Honor?
The objection will be overruled, but again, is well noted for the record. You may proceed.
So, doctor, were you done explaining how these bed bugs move through the vents?
Like I said, they're quite the travelers. They can slip in one side and start a new infestation on the other very easily.
And do you have any evidence that this is what happened?
I do. I was shown pictures of the outlet and mattress closest to that vent, which showed to me classic signs of bedbug infestations.
Your Honor, we'll be displaying exhibits 10B and 10C. Doctor, are these those photos you were just discussing?
Yes, they are.
They fair and accurate?
They appear so, yes.
Plaintiff moves exhibits 10B and 10C into evidence, Your Honor.
Any objections?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay, exhibits 10B and 10C will be admitted.
So, doctor, what are we looking at in these photographs?
Well, looking at that mattress, I saw brown streaks as well as signs of bedbug excrement towards the top. We saw the same thing with that outlet. Upon close examination of that outlet, I determined that those dots there, those were signs of bedbug excrement indicating a severe infestation.
Now, doctor, are you aware of any other possible sources that you were able to rule out for the bedbug infestation?
Well, I did look into the possibility that Mr. Westermeyer could have brought in the bedbugs himself from a motel or a hotel, but none of the evidence I collected supported that, so I ruled that out.
So let's talk finally about the treatment part of your method. Based on what you saw, what would the best treatment have been?
Based on the severity in those photos, I'd recommend, according to industry standards, a high-intensity heat treatment be conducted in all of the affected apartments at Lakeside.
And doctor, can you tell us what a heat treatment is?
Oh, it's exactly as it sounds. We bring a heater into the apartment to raise the temperature to about 130 degrees. Now, bed bugs, they can't survive at that temperature, so it's the best way to eliminate an infestation without using any harmful chemicals or invasive methods.
Doctor, did Lakeside use a heat treatment?
They did not.
What treatment did they use?
It's my understanding that the only treatment that occurred in Trey Westermeyer's apartment was the spraying of an all-purpose insecticide spray.
Do you believe that that was sufficient?
I don't. In my experience, all-purpose sprays, they're not targeted to kill bed bugs. It'd be, again, in my experience, about as effective as if you were to spray Febreze on the bugs.
So, doctor, what were your final conclusions in today's case?
It's my opinion that there was a severe bedbug infestation in Trey Westermeyer's apartment that originated from next door, Unit 11, and that the treatment within that apartment was ineffective.
Thank you, Dr. Howe, for your time. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Good afternoon, Dr. Howe.
Good afternoon.
You were hired in today's case to determine the source of a bedbug infestation, correct?
That's right.
First, I want to talk to you about how you know there was a bedbug infestation in Unit 10 at Lakeside, okay?
Of course.
Dr. Howe, you don't know if there was an infestation in Unit 10.
That's incorrect.
Well, you went to Unit 10 and you collected samples. Is that what you're telling us?
I didn't personally go, but I was shown overwhelming evidence that there was an infestation.
Well, we'll get to that evidence you received in a bit, but I just want to talk about what you did. And what you didn't do is you never actually got the chance to go to Unit 10, correct?
I didn't. Ever since COVID, we've been pretty cocooned in our offices.
You also didn't visit Unit 11, correct?
No, I wasn't able to go to Lakeside.
That's right. You've actually never inspected anywhere at Lakeside Apartments for bed bugs, correct?
Me personally, no. That's why I relied on the statements of exterminators, and other individuals at Lakeside.
That's right. In lieu of not going to Unit 10, you actually had to rely on some photographs of Unit 10, correct?
In part, sure.
And those photographs, well, those were the only visual evidence you had of Unit 10.
The only visual evidence, you're right.
And those photographs, they were given to you by Mr. Westermeyer.
Yes, he sent them over to me.
And you would recognize those photos that you talked about earlier on direct examination?
Of course.
I'll let the record reflect. I am sharing my screen with exhibits 10B and 10C. It's already been admitted into evidence. These are those photographs we were just talking about, right, Dr. Howe?
Yes, they are.
Now, you can't tell us that these photos came from Unit 10.
I didn't go personally, but several witnesses did confirm that these apartments were from Unit 10, including Ms. Karen Walton herself.
Oh, so you called Miss Walton and she told you, yes, exhibit 10B and 10C, that's of Unit 10 at Lakeside Apartments.
Ms. Walton wouldn't respond to my calls, but I was given her witness statement where she identified these photos from that apartment.
Well, she didn't say they were from Unit 10. She said she had no reason to doubt it, correct?
That's right. Her and several other witnesses said that same thing.
Well, none of these images can have anything in them that show the address of the unit.
The address, no.
None of these images say property of Lakeside Apartments.
No, they're close up so we can see the detail of the infestation.
If Mr. Westermeyer gave you photos, these photos, and they weren't actually from Unit 10, you wouldn't know, Dr. Howe, right?
I believe that's incorrect. In addition to Ms. Walton, several individuals confirmed that they believed these were from Unit 10. There's no reason to believe they're from anywhere else.
Dr. Howe, is it your testimony that you interviewed individuals who confirmed these photos were from Unit 10?
I didn't interview anybody, but I did read their witness statements.
And so that's a yes to my question. If these photos weren't from Unit 10, there's nothing in them that would indicate they weren't.
I guess the photos themselves, I suppose I did have to rely on these other witnesses. You're right.
Now, earlier you said that the black spots in these photos, that could be bug residue, correct?
That's right.
And that bug residue, you never actually collected any of it, right?
No, we didn't take samples.
That's right. You never sent any samples to confirm that it actually was bed bug residue.
No, that wasn't needed. The pattern shown here is overwhelming evidence of a bed bug infestation.
Dr. Howe, I want to talk to you about some other things you spoke to the plaintiff about. You also spoke to Mr. Westermeyer about his bed bug bites.
That's right.
You never saw any photos of those bed bug bites.
No photos, but he did describe them to me.
Mr. Westermeyer claimed he had been living with those bites for 8 months.
That's right.
You never saw any medical records that those bites existed or were treated.
I don't believe Mr. Westermeyer went to a hospital, so you're right, he didn't get a medical record there.
And earlier you said you had the opportunity to review all the witness affidavits in today's case, correct?
That's correct.
And not a single one of them corroborates ever seeing bed bug bites on Trey or Kim Westermeyer.
That's right. Unfortunately, they had to start wearing long sleeve clothes. That was their decision, but no other witness was able to see the bites. You're right.
Thank you, Dr. Howe. I have no further questions at this time, Your Honor.
And no redirect, Your Honor. I just ask that Dr. Howe be excused.
Dr. Howe, you may be excused. Thank you, Counselor Shea. Thank you, Counselor Roberts. Plaintiff may call their third witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, plaintiff calls Sam Lyons.
You may
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Sure thing, ma'am. Howdy, my name's Sam Lyons.
Where are you from, Mr. Lyons?
Oh, well, ma'am, I'm from all over. We moved around a lot when I was a kid, but I've been in Midlands for a while now.
And what do you do for a living?
Well, I got me a little petting zoo a few miles outside of town, a lion's paws. Now, we can't have any lions or tigers, of course. We've all seen how that can go, but we got the fluffiest little sheep, alpacas, goats. I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't want to waste your time with fluff.
Well, what kind of work did you do before you opened your petting zoo?
I was a maintenance man over at the Lakeside Apartments, ma'am.
How long were you at Lakeside for?
Darn near 19 years. I could have raised 3-4 clutches of sugar gliders in that time, but I was, fixing pipes and changing bulbs.
And can you tell the jury a little bit more about what you did during your time at Lakeside?
Sure. I mean, I did everything. I was head of maintenance, but people over there called me the human Swiss Army knife. I fixed stuff, I cleaned stuff, and I lived in that building for all 19 of them years.
And as the head of maintenance, did you have a staff that worked under you?
No, ma'am. Much like the Siberian brown lemming, of which I have 4, I lead a pretty solitary lifestyle. It was always just old Sam on the case over there.
Well, were you trained for this position?
No, ma'am. Kai Kieran never required any of that. I've always known my way around a roll of duct tape.
I want to talk a little bit more about your time at Lakeside. Now, have you ever met a tenant by the name of Trey Westermeyer?
Yes, ma'am. Trey lived in Unit 10.
What kinds of interactions did you have with Mr. Westermeyer?
Well, he called me pretty often to fix minor stuff here and there. Kept the place pretty tip top. I know he lived there with his daughter, so I didn't mind helping out. But this whole mess with the bed bugs, that's really something else.
You mentioned a bed bug issue. How did you first get involved with that?
Well, I got a call that the landlord wanted me to pay attention to a bed bug issue in Trey's unit. Best I could do was call in a buddy the next morning.
And what happened the next morning?
Well, I brought in my pal. He works for Bugs Be Gone. He's an exterminator. And we were at Trey's door around 8:30 a.m., but Trey made us leave and we never got to treat the place. In fairness, ma'am, I never actually talked to Trey about the problem.
Did you tell the landlord that you never got to spray Mr. Westermeyer's unit?
Yes, ma'am. Kai just told me not to worry about it.
Well, were you ever able to spray the apartment?
Well, yes, ma'am. 4 days later, we sprayed it down while Trey wasn't around.
And can you tell us a little bit more about what happened during this spraying?
Yes, ma'am. As maintenance, I'm within my right to go in, but I ain't keen on snooping. We didn't move nothing. We didn't even turn the lights on. We just, sprayed and prayed like a skunk at a summer camp.
And did you ever treat Mr. Westermeyer's apartment again?
No, ma'am. That was the first, last, and only treatment I can confirm, and just some all-purpose stuff.
Objection, Your Honor. to a lack of personal knowledge, if I may be heard.
You may.
Your Honor, this witness can testify that that was the last time they addressed a bed bug complaint, but for him to testify that that was the last treatment that was done would be outside his personal knowledge.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
I believe Mr. Lyons stated that was the first, last, and only treatment he can confirm. It's certainly within his knowledge to state which treatments he's aware of, and that's exactly what he stated.
Anything further, Counselor DeVoe?
Yes, Your Honor. He can talk about what he did, but to say that that was the last treatment that was done to Unit 10, that would be outside his personal knowledge. He can surely testify about that one experience, but anything outside of that would be inadmissible.
The objection is sustained.
Mr. Lyons, let's move on and talk about another tenant at Lakeside. Have you ever met a man by the name of Taylor Bauer?
Yes, ma'am. Taylor's in Unit 11, right next to Trey.
Have you ever been inside Mr. Bauer's apartment?
Unfortunately, it never for any longer than I had to. And hey, I'm a zookeeper.
What do you mean by that, Mr. Lyons?
Well, first and foremost, it stinks to high heaven in there. I mean, it always has. It goes right through the vents and into every other room. There's so much crap piled up all over the place that I don't know how anyone manages to
Objection.
walk around.
To relevance?
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. It's the plaintiff's contention today that bed bugs came from Mr. Bauer's unit to Mr. Westermeyer's unit. Now, to hear that Mr. Bauer's unit is messy makes it much more likely that bed bugs were there and just went undetected. That's why this testimony is relevant.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
Dr. Howe previously testified about possible bed bugs in unit number 11. However, for this witness to go into how messy that apartment was without any foundation as to why that's relevant, it would not make any fact in this case more or less likely.
I'll sustain the objection. You may proceed. If you can lay that foundation, Ms. Hahn, you can attempt to do so.
Mr. Lyons, did you ever see exterminators treat Mr. Bauer's apartment?
I did, ma'am, on my last day, the day I was fired.
And why were you fired from Lakeside?
Well, all I know, ma'am, is I've been recommending better treatment the whole time Trey was there, and Trey moves out and boom. I mean, 19 years down the drain, mountains of problems handled. And then Kieran tells me I'm not as good as real professionals. But luckily, I had some critters at home, so I got back and moved on quick, but it did hurt my feelings.
To be clear, Mr. Lyons, were you the only maintenance worker at Lakeside while Mr. Westermeyer was a tenant?
Yes, ma'am, and apparently I wasn't enough.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Lyons. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Thank you, Counselor Hahn. Counselor DeVoe, you may proceed with cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Lyons. I just have a few more questions for you.
All righty.
You went to Trey Westenmeyer's apartment on November 30th of 2018. Is that right?
Yes, yes, sir.
You were there to address a complaint about bed bugs.
Yes, sir. I got a call from Kieran.
You were there with an exterminator named Blair Crawford, like you mentioned just a moment ago.
Yes, sir.
And that morning, Mr. Westermeyer didn't let you in.
No, he did not, sir. In fairness, I hadn't said anything to Trey about it, and well, I wouldn't want this big hillbilly barging in there either.
Well, just to be clear, that was the day after Mr. Westermeyer first complained about bed bugs.
Yes, sir.
And you spoke with Kieran Walton, the owner of Lakeside, that same day.
Oh, yes, sir.
Now, you mentioned something on direct examination, and I wrote it down. You said that Miss Walton told you not to worry about it. Is that right?
Yes, sir. She said that because Trey was moving around so much, we could probably get in there while he wasn't around.
Well, she actually told you to treat the apartment as soon as possible. Is that right?
Yes, sir. She told me to do that.
And you did just that, correct?
Yes, sir. But I'm not an exterminator, man. I mean, I fixed the pipes and changed the bulbs, and I just sprayed in the dark as best I could.
Well, you went back to the apartment a few days later.
Yes, sir. I mean, I was at the apartments all the time.
You were with that exterminator, Blair Crawford, again,
Yes, sir. Blaine's a pal of mine. I called him over in the dead of night.
This time, Mr. Westenmeyer wasn't home.
Well, that's correct, sir.
So you and the exterminator were able to enter the apartment.
Yes, sir. Lights were off and I have a key. So
Inside that apartment, Mr. Lyons, you never saw any black or brown spots, did you?
well, sir, I always forget to wear these and it was really dark in there. I didn't see much of anything.
But just referring you back to my question, that's a no. You didn't see any black or brown spots inside Mr. Westermeyer's apartment?
That's correct, sir. I didn't see much of anything.
You also didn't see any bed bugs inside Mr. Westermeyer's apartment?
Sir, true. Yeah, I didn't see anything.
Now I want to talk about what Mr. Westermeyer does for work. You know that he's a reporter, right?
Yes, sir.
And you would always hear Mr. Westermeyer say things about his job.
Yeah, from time to time, I caught snippets while I was out, in the hall fixing a leak or something.
One of the things you heard Mr. Westermeyer say is that he admired someone named Reagan Thomas. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
You know who Reagan Thomas is?
Vaguely.
Well, Reagan Thomas is a reporter who got famous after breaking a big story. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
That big story was about the Walton family, right?
I believe so.
Specifically, Kai Walton's brother, Drew.
Yes, sir. I believe things in that story came out as true. I think Trey admired that journalistic code of ethics or whatever it was.
Well, you heard Mr. Westermeyer say that he wanted to be the next Reagan Thomas.
Yes, sir. I think I heard that.
Just to be clear, that was before there was any complaint about bedbugs.
Oh, yes, sir. I think so. I don't remember that quote as being too significant.
Well, just regardless, you heard that before there was any complaint about bedbugs. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Though Trey moved in and it was pretty quick there was bugs.
Just a yes or no to the question, Mr. Lyons.
It's still a yes, sir.
Thank you. Your Honor, I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you. Is there any redirect, Counselor Hahn?
No, Your Honor, I just asked Mr. Lyons to be able to step down.
Mr. Lyons, you may be excused. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Anything further from either party at this time?
No, Your Honor, at this time, plaintiff rests our case in chief.
Nothing further from the defense.
Okay. I'm getting a bit of a hand slap on time. It's totally my fault, not your fault. How long do you want to take as a break between, or do you want to take a break at this time?
Your Honor, whatever is the defense would prefer, plaintiff's perfectly fine going right into defense case in chief.
Your Honor, if we could just have a couple minutes, 1 or 2 minutes is fine with us.
Okay, that'll be appreciated just in case the judges need to step away for a quick moment. So let's just come back in 2 minutes. And if I could just have the cameras for both attorneys on when we come back, we'll start in 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Very good. Thank you, counselors. Let me just do a quick check. Judge Victoria, are you back with us? How about Judge Arnoff?
Sorry about that. I'm here.
Okay. Judge Douglas
I'm here.
and Judge Coltzes?
I'm here.
Okay, excellent. All righty, defense, you may proceed with your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Blair Crawford to the stand. Excuse me. May I proceed? Please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. Name's Blaine Crawford.
What do you do for a living?
I'm an exterminator for bugs begun right here in the Midlands.
How long have you been an exterminator?
Since about 2010, I actually used to work for a company called the Pest Specialists before I joined Bugs Begun in 2016, just to get some better working hours.
How did you first become an exterminator?
When I first joined the Pest Specialists, I worked as an apprentice to the more experienced exterminators there. They'd bring me out on the job and they'd teach me what different types of bugs look like, how to spot the common signs of infestations, how to treat those infestations, the whole 9 yards, really.
How many bug infestations have you treated?
Well, it's been 11 years and I've lost count. But if you ask me to put a number to it, I'd have to say over 200, from roaches to bed bugs and just about everything in between. You'd be surprised at some of the more exotic pets that people have in their homes.
Have you ever treated a place called Lakeside Apartments?
Yes, I have. Bugs Begun, we've got a monthly contract with them, so I go there at least once a month.
What do these monthly visits typically involve?
Well, they're two-part. First, I inspect the building, the common areas, and the individual units for any signs of bugs. And then the second part, the spraying, is as I'm inspecting, I'll spray down API in those areas.
Can you explain to us exactly what is API?
Sure. API is the brand of all-purpose insecticide that we use at Bugs Begun. It basically does the two main jobs of any insecticide worth its salt. It kills bugs, and it makes them not want to live there in the first place. Extermination and prevention. That's the name of the game.
What kinds of bugs does API target?
It's an all-purpose insecticide, so it targets the types of bugs you might expect to find in a domestic environment. Think things like roaches, flies, termites, spiders, and bed bugs.
Were you ever asked to spray this insecticide in Unit 10 at Lakeside?
Yes, I was. Sam, the maintenance guy over there, he called me over a few times to spray it down separately from the other units.
Do you know why?
Sure. He told me that the tenant in unit number 10, Mr. Westermeyer, was complaining about having bed bugs there.
When were you first called out to the plaintiff's unit?
That was November 30th of 2018. Sam and I showed up at 8:30 in the morning.
Were you able to inspect the apartment that day?
No, sir. When we got there, Mr. Westermeyer wouldn't let us in. It meant that I had to come back a few days later to conduct the inspection.
When were you able to go back to Unit 10?
That was a few days later, this time in December. I only managed to show up in the evening that day, so I just did a quick run through because the lighting was bad and did a spray down with API. I made a note that I would come back later in December during my general inspection to do a more thorough inspection during the daytime.
Were you able to return to do that more thorough inspection?
Yes, I was. I completed it as part of my December of 2018 monthly inspection of Lakeside.
Mr. Crawford, before we talk about that inspection, how do you inspect an apartment for bed bugs?
Well, of course, you inspect the whole unit. You carefully look in all the areas. However, since it's a potential case of bed bugs, we obviously put emphasis on the beds and the bedrooms. So I've actually brought along a little training bed that we use at Bugs Be Gone that demonstrates that inspection process.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Let the record reflect Mr. Crawford is making use of a visual aid. What are we looking at here, Mr. Crawford?
This is a training bed that we use at Bugs Be Gone to teach new hires about how to inspect the bed for bed bugs and what are some things to look for while you're doing it.
How do you inspect a bed for bed bugs?
There are three things you got to look at. You got to look at the the pillow, the mattress, and the bed frame.
Well, let's start with the first one. How do you inspect the pillow?
Well, to begin, you take a look on the outside, flip it over, nothing there, but that's not enough. We got to actually remove the pillow from the pillowcase because bed bugs like to hide in the cracks and corners of the pillow. As we do that, we can see that this side is clean. However, this side has visible bed bug residue along the right seam edge.
What about the next part of the inspection? How do you inspect the mattress?
In order to inspect the mattress, you have to remove all the linens and sheets you've tied. There can't be anything there, no comforter, no mattress protector, no fitted sheet, none of that. So we pull back the sheets to completely expose the mattress. And of course, we can see right here that there is bed bug residue along this top edge right here toward the center, as well as toward the bottom edge right here on the mattress. Again, you got to look at the sides very carefully. They like to hide in the cracks and the corners.
And what about the final part? How do you inspect the bed frame?
The bed frame is fairly simple. You do a walk around and you look at the general bed frame, any sort of divots or cracks in it. In this case, you got to look at both the headboard and the footboard. The footboard here, as we can see, is clean. The headboard, if you have to pull it back from the wall, you should do that. And in this case, we can see visible bed bug residue along the left post where the post meets the bed frame.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. You can put that visual aid away. Now, is that how you inspected the plaintiff's unit, Unit 10, in 2018?
Yes, sir. I did that for both Mr. Westermeyer's bed as well as his daughter's bed, in addition to inspecting the bedrooms themselves and the entire units.
Did you find any bed bugs?
No, sir. I didn't find any bed bugs, dead or alive, nor did I find any signs of bed bug residue, including blood, fecal matter, or droplets.
Was that the last time you visited the plaintiff's unit?
No. When we get a case of potential bed bugs, we always plan follow-up inspections after our first ones.
And what did you find during those follow-up inspections?
Nothing, because I wasn't able to conduct them. You see, in January, I showed up at Mr. Westermeyer's door and knocked in order to be let in and conduct an inspection. He just told me it wasn't a good time and then didn't let me in. He basically did the same thing for February, March, April, May, and June. I was never able to go back in and do another inspection.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. I have no further questions at this time.
You may proceed with cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Crawford.
Afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
I can't complain.
Can you see and hear me okay, Mr. Crawford?
You're looking good on mine.
Awesome. Just let me know if that ever changes, okay?
Sure.
Now, Mr. Crawford, you just showed the jury how to do a proper, thorough visual inspection of a bed for bed bugs, right?
That's right. That's how we do it.
When you did that thorough visual inspection, the lights are on in your room, right?
Oh, that's right, sir.
And I can see the sun peeking in through your blinds, right?
Yeah, they're not open, but you can still see.
And you told the jury that you never saw any signs of bed bugs at Lakeside Apartments, right?
Not in Mr. Westermeyer's unit, no.
Now, you did 2 inspections in Mr. Westermeyer's unit?
That's right. There was the one in the start of December where it was in the evening and I couldn't really see well. And then there was the following one, later on in December during the general inspection.
Well, let's talk more about those inspections and why you might not have seen any bed bugs. During that first inspection, unlike your apartment, Mr. Westermeyer's was dimly lit, right?
That's right. And it was the evening, so no luck with opening the windows.
So there's no light shining in through the blinds either, true?
No, sir.
Actually, when you did that inspection, you were in a rush.
That's right. I didn't have enough time to do a real thorough look there.
You were in a rush?
That's right.
During that second inspection, you never brought any canine dogs with you.
No, sir, there was no need. We only bring in dogs once we've established that there is an infestation. And at the time, I hadn't seen any evidence supporting that.
Well, actually, Mr. Crawford, you'd admit that to make sure you've actually eliminated a bed bug problem, you need to bring in canines to inspect the unit. Isn't that true?
Yes, sir. As I've just said, we bring in the dogs once the treatment has been conducted on the unit to make sure the treatment was successful. But we don't bring in the dogs just to determine if there's a problem.
Mr. Crawford, bringing you back to my question, that's a yes.
Sure.
All right, so let's talk about where those bed bugs might have actually come from. You've inspected the neighboring unit's apartment, Mr. Taylor Bowers.
That's right. I've inspected all of the units at Lakeside.
Well, when you inspected Mr. Bowers' apartment, you never actually looked in the crevices.
No, sir. Mr. Bauer does have quite the collection of objects piled up.
You'd admit that you thought there were pests hiding in those crevices.
Oh, sure. Bugs like roaches really like to hide around the cardboard boxes. They're attracted to the smell. I definitely thought there was something.
That's a yes, Mr. Crawford.
Oh, yes.
You actually thought that Mr. Bowers' apartment, it was so dirty it needed a deep cleaning.
Oh, exactly. I was sure there was some kind of roach there one way or another.
You told the landlord you thought it needed a deep cleaning.
Exactly.
Let's talk about the landlord's reaction. She laughed at you.
Oh, that's right. I hadn't had any evidence that there's actually a bug in the unit.
Told you she pays you too much money already.
Sure, we've got a monthly contract with them.
And then after hearing your suggestion, landlord just walked away.
Yeah, that was all I had to tell Miss Walton, so we just said our goodbyes.
She just walked away.
Yeah, the conversation ended.
So let's talk about how you used to treat bed bug problems at Lakeside Apartments. Like you told the jury, you used to work for the pest specialists.
Yes, sir, for 6 years.
That was back in 2010. You visited Lakeside Apartments.
If you're referring to the bed bug infestation I treated there, that was in 2012, sir.
And during that bed bug infestation, you did a blacklight inspection.
Oh, that's right. We had determined that there was a severe infestation on 2 units on the 2nd floor. So we brought in the heat treatment, and then we brought in the canines and the black lights and brought in some more heat treatment. The whole thing lasted 3 days.
Let's break this down, Mr. Crawford. You did a blacklight inspection, yes?
Yes, that's right.
You did 3 rounds of canine inspections.
Yes, we do it after each round of heat treatment.
And then, like you told the jury, you did heat treatment.
Yes, that's correct.
Problem was gone in 3 days.
Yes, and we never received any follow-up complaints.
Let's talk about how you never treated Mr. Westermeyer's apartment. You never did a blacklight inspection.
No, sir, there was no need.
Never did 3 rounds of canine inspections.
No, sir. Again, there was no need. I hadn't seen any signs of bed bugs or bed bug residue.
Never did a targeted heat treatment in Mr. Westermeyer's apartment.
No.
Finally, Mr. Crawford, I want to talk about whether or not bed bugs being at Lakeside Apartments, whether or not that's just a made-up story. You remember inspecting Lakeside Apartments in June of 2019?
Yes.
You inspected unit number 12?
That's right. That's Mrs. Jalen Sampson's unit.
Just 2 doors down from where Mr. Westermeyer lived.
That's correct.
You saw clear signs of bed bugs in that apartment.
That's right. I was conducting my monthly inspection. I walked into her guest bedroom and saw the signs, so I immediately notified her about it.
You saw clear signs of bed bugs in June of 2019 at Lakeside Apartments. Yes or no?
Yes, sir. And once I saw that, I notified Ms. Sampson about it.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Crawford. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Is there any redirect, Counselor Shea?
Yes, Your Honor, if I may proceed.
You may.
Mr. Crawford, why didn't you recommend a heat treatment in 2018 and early 2019?
There was no need, as I had not seen any evidence of bed bugs at Lakeside Apartment that would warrant it.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
I assume there's no recross?
No recross, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you all. Mr. Crawford, you may be excused. Does the defense have any further witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense now calls Kai Walton to the stand.
I see 2 counselors and a witness. You may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Please introduce yourself to the members of the jury.
Hi, my name's Kai Walton.
Where are you from, Miss Walton?
I was born and raised on the south side of Jackson, Midlands, where I lived most of my life with my siblings. But now that all my brothers and sisters have grown up, I live right here in Midland City.
What was it like growing up for you?
It was rough, really unpredictable most of the time, especially after my dad died when my sister Debbie was born. So it was just me, my mom, and 4 toddlers, if you can believe it, in a 1-bedroom walk-up for a while. And I was the oldest, so I spent most of my time helping my mom out, helping her put food on the table.
How did you help your mom?
Whenever she went out looking for part-time jobs, she'd ask if they had enough work to go around for 2, so that her and I could switch off going to work and watching the little ones throughout the day. It's hard because I was still in school, but that hustle, it definitely paid off.
How so?
There wasn't much to do besides work and study and work. So I saved a lot, as much as I could. And one day I just got this weird idea to put a down payment on this old building in our neighborhood that the city was about to knock down. But the place, it was so beautiful. I remember thinking, I could do this. I could turn this into something great for my family.
What did you do with that building?
I decided I would turn it into apartments, actually. The building, it's on the bay of Lake Murphy. And when I bought it, I couldn't come up with anything more original than Lakeside Apartments. And after that, it just kind of stuck.
Miss Walton, are you still the owner of Lakeside Apartments?
Yes, of course. I mean, the place means everything to me. It's how all of this started.
How what started?
But sorry, Walton Enterprises, which is and always has been a family company that I started with Lakeside. And now we invest in all sorts of really nice projects that I'm passionate about, like Water Worldwide, and my personal favorite, besides running Lakeside, Girls Who Code.
Well, Miss Walton, if you have these other projects, how often do you go to Lakeside?
Often, very often, maybe too often if you ask my brother Patrick, but I like to go back to Lakeside as much as I can. The place really reminds me of our mom. She loved it there, and she used to live in her apartment at Lakeside until she passed away a few years ago.
Now, Miss Walton, I want to talk about what you do as the owner. What do you do when you're at Lakeside Apartments?
Well, I still have my own apartment in the building. So first things first, I go check on the plans. And then I check in with our tenants, some of whom are really great family friends now. And of course, I have meetings with Lakeside staff to address issues we may be having around the grounds.
You mentioned checking in with some tenants. I'd like to talk about one in particular. Do you know Trey Westermeyer?
Yes, I do. Actually, personally interview all of my tenants at Lakeside before offering them a unit. So that's how I met Trey back in 2018.
Is Mr. Westermeyer still one of your tenants?
No, Trey, He stopped paying his rent towards the end of his lease at Lakeside after what he said was a bed bug issue.
To your knowledge, Miss Walton, was there a bed bug issue?
Not that I could tell, no. But Trey insisted at the time, so I listened and I gladly helped him out.
Let's start at the beginning. When did Mr. Westermeyer first insist there was an issue?
That was when he sent me an email in November of 2018, which the email, it made it sound really bad.
Well, how did you respond?
I was actually already on my way to Lakeside that evening when I got the email. So I just went to Trey's apartment right away to see what was going on. But when he answered the door, it was weird. He said the bed bug problem wasn't actually that serious.
What did you do when Mr. Westermeyer told you the problem wasn't that serious?
I mean, I was already there. So I just gave our property manager, Jesse Rogers, a ring anyway, so that he could get our resident pest control guys to come by and check it out.
Did pest control come to Lakeside?
Yes, they did the next morning. But again, it's strange. Apparently when they got to Trey's apartment to do their thing, Trey didn't let them come in.
You know why?
No, not at the time. It was all very confusing. So I thought I would just apologize to the pest professionals in front of me and asked if they would come back when Trey was out. And thankfully they did after I offered to pay for both of their visits.
When did pest control come back?
They came back for a follow-up a few days later, I'd say, when I happened to be back at the property watering my tulips again. I need about 2/3 of an inch every week or so.
How did that follow-up with pest control go?
Great. There weren't any signs of bed bugs, so the guys were in and out in a few minutes. But I told them to come back again anyway to double check that we were good to go.
To your knowledge, Miss Walton, were there any other issues inside Mr. Westermeyer's apartment after that visit?
I couldn't tell you because when pest control came back the following month for a checkup, Trey didn't let them into the unit again.
Do you know why they weren't let in a second time?
No, I don't.
Well, how did you react when you found out Mr. Westermeyer wasn't letting pest control inside?
Well, really, I didn't know what else to do. And out of nowhere, Trey stops paying his rent. Honestly, I just didn't get it. At least not until Trey approached me in the hall one day. And then all of this, it started to make more sense to me.
What did Mr. Westermeyer say when he approached you?
He said he knows I'm loaded and that he's going to expose me for a promotion at work.
What does he do for work?
Trey's a reporter. Well, I mean, reporters in my family, it rarely goes over well.
What do you mean?
Even though it always wasn't that way, you know, it's not a secret that my family has money now.
How much money?
Well, I mean, yeah, Walton Enterprises, it started with Lakeside, right? But it's $1 billion company now. And I'm very proud of the work we do and our team. They're amazing. But it's for that same reason that our lives are very public.
How public are your lives?
On top of Walton Enterprises, my family's been pretty involved in Midlands politics ever since my brother became a state senator. Lately, he's been relentless in trying to get me to dip my own toes into politics as well, though I'd really prefer to stay out of the spotlight.
Why do you prefer that?
Because, you know, even though a lot has changed since I was a kid, I built this business from the ground up. So I know what really matters is the work we do on the ground every day. Certainly not any of this drama that Trey's stirring up in the media.
What drama is Mr. Westermeyer giving to the media?
Just turn on the TV. This lawsuit, it's been all over the news for a while now. And all of this, it's so frustrating, disappointing even. But anyway, it certainly wouldn't be the first time that someone tries to sell a story like this one.
Thank you for your time, Ms. Walton. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
You may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Walton. Before I begin, can you hear and see me all right?
I can, thank you.
Now, I want to start by talking about the bed bugs. Now, Mr. Westermeyer made you aware that there were bed bugs in his apartment.
That's what he said to me in an email that I got shortly after he moved in, about November.
Ms. Walton, you'd actually agree with me that there may have been bed bugs in his apartment.
At first, sure, I thought there might have been. But after all the measures we took with Bugs Be Gone and my conversation with Trey, I no longer think that's the case.
Ms. Walton, in court today, you believe there may have been bed bugs in Mr. Westermeyer's apartment.
There might have been, which is exactly why we took up all the measures with our pest control services.
Now, Taylor Bauer resides in the apartment directly next to Mr. Westermeyer. Is that right?
Yes, Old Man Bowers lived there for many years. He loves his unit, number 11.
That's right. And he owns a lot of stuff, right?
Sure. Again, Old Man Bowers, quite the collector and also quite the character.
In fact, Miss Walton, you'd call him a hoarder.
Objection, Your Honor, to more prejudicial than probative, if I may be heard.
You may.
Your Honor, opposing counsel can talk about items inside Mr. Bauer's apartment that may be places where bugs could hide. But for opposing counsel to describe Mr. Bauer as an hoarder has little probative value and only serves to prejudice the jury.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
As we heard with Dr. Howe's testimony, bringing items into one's apartment that may have been traveled from multiple places are perfect hiding spots for bed bugs. Your Honor, this is going to show that it's more likely that Taylor Bauer may have had a bed bug problem and not known it because of all the items that he was bringing into his apartment. For us to characterize him as a hoarder with Miss Walton's own words is not more prejudicial than probative, Your Honor.
The objection is overruled. You may proceed.
So, Miss Walton, again, you'd call Mr. Bauer a hoarder.
Well, I certainly would never say something like that to him, but his apartment is quite messy.
Just redirecting you back, that's a yes, you'd call him a hoarder.
I think his apartment resembles some of those things that you see on the hoarder shows. But again, I would never say that to Old Man Bauer. He's a great family friend.
So let's look into his apartment a little bit more. Mr. Westermeyer actually brought up to you that Mr. Bauer may have been the source.
That's what Trey said, yes.
So naturally, you wanted to make sure that he wasn't.
Sure.
You wanted to check out his apartment yourself.
Well, I did give it a quick look after Trey brought that to my attention, although I didn't think it was entirely necessary. Mr. Bauer, he's lived in the building for many years, and I've never received a complaint from him or from my mother, who was actually his neighbor before she passed away.
Miss Walton, you never had Bugs Be Gone follow up on the complaint in Mr. Bauer's apartment.
I'm sorry, what complaint?
Mr. Westermeyer's complaint that he may have been the source.
Oh, I never had Bugs Be Gone check up on what Trey said about Mr. Bauer, no.
So let's move on to the treatment that you conducted in Mr. Westermeyer's apartment. As you said, you were present when the exterminator went for a follow-up inspection.
Yes, on one of the occasions.
Like you said, they were in and out very quickly.
It took a few minutes, yes, that's all.
From what you saw, they only did a visual inspection.
A visual inspection?
Yes, Miss Walton, from what you saw, Bugs Be Gone did a visual inspection.
Yes, they walked into the apartment and took a look around.
Now, you had Bugs Be Gone spray that API, the all-purpose insecticide, in Mr. Westermeyer's apartment, right?
Yes, on another occasion, on the one that you just mentioned, that follow-up, they didn't find any bed bugs. So I told them to come by again and do an extra layer of that insecticide thing that they spray, just in case.
That's right. Now, you were also made aware that there were bed bugs present in Unit 12, Mr. Bauer's other neighboring apartment.
I think I received an email sometime in June saying that there may have been an issue in that unit.
That's right. And you'd recognize that email if I showed it to you today.
I should.
Your Honor, we'll be displaying what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 7. Ms. Walton, this is that email?
Yes, looks like it.
Fair and accurate?
Yes, appears to be.
Plaintiff moves Exhibit 7 into evidence.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor, to hearsay.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Pursuant to that case law that we discussed earlier, Kaplan v. Sikora, this is actually Blaine Crawford's statements, and he was under the employment of Miss Walton at the time of writing this email in response to treating one of the apartments in Lakeside, and therefore it is exempt from hearsay under Rule 801 D2.
May I respond?
You may.
Your Honor, Mr. Blaine Crawford works for an entirely different company called Bugs Be Gone. He is not an employee of Miss Walton or Lakeside Apartments. He's on a different schedule, different payroll, different methods of communication. Therefore, Mr. Crawford would not be an employee of Miss Walton.
May I respond briefly, Your Honor?
Yes.
That case law specifically applies to an employee or agent hired by Miss Walton. Bugs Be Gone were acting on the behalf of Miss Walton to treat that Unit 12 in Lakeside. Therefore, they were acting within the agency of employment by Miss Walton.
Anything further, Counselor DeVoe?
Yes, Your Honor. An agent would be someone who can speak on behalf of a company and act in accordance with that company. Mr. Crawford was just one singular employee from a different company that was contracted by Miss Walton. That would not establish enough foundation for him to be an employee or an agent. Therefore, that case law would not apply to Mr. Crawford.
The objection is sustained.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, I just want to be clear, Miss Walton. Now, you actually were present when Mr. Crawford just testified.
Yes.
And he said that an API is used for extermination and prevention.
Yes.
You never have heard any results from that API being actually useful for extermination or prevention.
Not personally, beyond what Mr. Crawford told me about why he uses it in the apartments. I'm not sure anything specific about the insecticide.
Thank you, Ms. Walton. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you, Counselor Roberts. Counselor DeVoe, do you have anything further?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked that Miss Walton be excused.
Okay, thank you both. Thank you, Ms. Walton. You may be excused. Defense may call their third witness.
The defense calls Jesse Rogers to the stand.
Can y'all see me right now?
No, Mr. Rogers, I think your video is turned off. Now you're muted, Mr. Rogers.
Lord have mercy. Can you guys see me now?
Yes, it's perfect.
I'm so sorry, everyone.
Please introduce yourself to the members of the jury.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jesse Earnhardt Rogers Jr.
What do you do for a living?
Well, right now I'm the property manager over at Lakeside Apartments, but y'all might know me from my time on the track. I used to be a NASCAR driver back in the glory days. This is my jersey right there, but they used to call me the Chihuahua because I'm small, fast, and my bark is worse than my bite.
How long have you been working at Lakeside Apartments?
Well, my driving career took a long walk off a short pier once I tragically injured my elbow getting out of bed. So I've been here at Lakeside since 2015, just waiting to retire and spend some time with the grandbabies.
What do you do as property manager?
Well, it's actually a lot like driving. It seems simple at first, you're just turning left 500 times, but there's a little more to it than that. It's my job to negotiate contracts, fill any vacant apartments, and manage any of our maintenance requests. Generally, it's my job to make sure the tenants are happy.
Were you the property manager when Trey Westermeyer lived at Lakeside?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Westermeyer took a long-term pit stop here at Lakeside on October 15th of 2018.
What was it like having the plaintiff as a tenant?
It was fine for about the first week. Then the complaints kicked into high gear. Mr. Westermeyer started complaining way more than any of our other tenants.
What kind of complaints did he have?
You know, he was complaining about things like the water pressure being too low in the shower, or the dishwasher not working just right, or the lighting being too dim.
How did you respond to those complaints?
Oh, well, I always pass all of our maintenance requests right along to Sam. He's our one-man pit crew. You know, we're real close. We're like country brothers. He's the shake to my bake. But I always make sure that he's taking care of Mr. Westermeyer's issues, even if I think he's making a mountain out of a molehill.
To your knowledge, was Sam able to fix all of the plaintiff's issues?
For the most part, we did get a complaint one time from Mr. Westermeyer. It seemed like Sam might need a crew, so we called in backup.
What was that complaint for?
Well, you know, he phoned me up ranting and raving all about bed bugs. Now, this was only about a month after he'd moved in, so I thought maybe he was talking with his tongue out his shoe. But, you know, in an effort to keep the track running smoothly, we decided to take this one especially serious.
Why did you take it especially seriously?
Well, it was all about this email that Mr. Westermeyer had sent me only about 3 weeks before his initial bed bug complaint. In it, he mentioned having bed bugs in one of the motels he was at.
Would you recognize that email if I were to show it to you?
Yes, ma'am, I would.
Let the record reflect I'm currently sharing my screen with what's been previously entered into evidence as Exhibit 6. Now, Mr. Rogers, are you able to see my screen okay?
Yes, ma'am, I can.
What is this?
That looks to be like the email I was just talking about that Mr. Westermeyer sent us.
What did the plaintiff say in this email?
Well, he was talking all about how he didn't want to stay at the motel anymore and how he was sure that there was money somewhere to move him to a better place.
What did he say about the motel?
Well, he said that while he was in the lobby, he heard someone mention having bed bugs in the motel.
And then what did he say about the money?
Well, he said that to scrounge up some more money, he could always write a story on his landlord.
Did you ever speak with the plaintiff about this email?
Yes, ma'am. I brought it up to Mr. Westermeyer. He got just about redder than an engine 200 laps in a race. He said the email was real private and that it needed to be deleted immediately.
Let the record reflect that I'm no longer sharing my screen. Now, before the plaintiff, had you ever gotten complaints about bed bugs before?
No, ma'am. In my time at Lakeside, Mr. Westermeyer was our first bed bug complaint. Want to make sure it was our last.
In your time at the property, had you ever seen any bed bugs?
Oh, no, ma'am. Of course not.
So when Mr. Westermeyer complained, what did you do?
Oh, well, I got Sam right on it, of course. We even went out and hired a bed bug specialist just to be sure. They were over at Mr. Westermeyer's apartment the very next morning.
How did the meeting go that next morning?
Well, you know, Sam and the exterminator were in the building for about as long as an Indy lap on brand new tires with a teenage driver. Mr. Westermeyer didn't even let them into the apartment to look for the bed bugs, so they had to pack up and leave.
Do you know what happened next?
Well, they had to come back a couple days later when Mr. Westermeyer wasn't home.
Was that the plaintiff's last complaint?
Yes, ma'am. He lived there for about 6 more months before he eventually stopped paying rent.
What did you do when the plaintiff stopped paying rent?
Well, you know, I gave him a call just to make sure everything was okay.
What did he say?
He was all kinds of fuss on the phone. He said something about wanting to take Kieran down, about how he was going to make more money off of this than I'd ever seen in my entire life.
Did you know what he was talking about?
No, ma'am, not really. He was waving around a picture with a bug in a bag and said something about some lawyers getting a big payday off of it.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time.
You may proceed with cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Hello, Mr. Rogers. Before I begin, can you hear and see me okay?
Yes, ma'am, crystal clear.
Perfect. I actually want to revisit something you were just telling the jury about. Your Honor, at this time, we'll be screen sharing Exhibit 6 again. Now, Mr. Rogers, can you see the email on the screen?
You know, it's hard to see anything these days, but yes, ma'am, I can.
And you were just telling the jury about this email, right?
I believe so.
I want to focus on this second paragraph where Trey Westermeyer writes he was going to write a story. You see where I'm at?
I can't see your mouse if that's how you're pointing, but I believe I know what you're talking about.
Now, here, Mr. Westermeyer writes that he's going to write up a piece on his landlord, right?
Yes, ma'am, that's right.
But he didn't say what that story would be about.
Not in this email, no.
He didn't say the story would be about Lakeside Apartments.
No, he didn't, but he was talking about his landlord.
And he certainly didn't say the story would be about bed bugs, does he?
Not that I can tell, no, ma'am.
All right, Mr. Rogers, I want to talk a little bit more about bed bugs now, specifically at Lakeside. Now, you know a tenant by the name of Taylor Bauer, right?
That's right, Old Man Bauer.
You've been inside his apartment?
A couple times, yes, ma'am.
And you'd agree with me, he has a lot of stuff, right?
That's right, yes, ma'am.
Well, let's show the jury some photographs of this apartment. Your Honor, at this time, we'll be screen sharing Exhibits 9F and 9G. Mr. Rogers, can you see these pictures okay?
Yes, ma'am, I can.
And you recognize these as photographs of Old Man Bauer's apartment?
Yes, that's what it usually looked like.
Your Honor, at this time, plaintiff offers Exhibit 9F and Exhibit 9G into evidence.
Are there any objections?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay, they will be admitted.
Mr. Rogers, you'd agree with me, Old Man Bauer's apartment is disorganized.
Well, sure.
He's not very clean.
No, not particularly.
And just looking at these pictures, Mr. Rogers, if there were bed bugs under that laundry basket, we wouldn't know.
To be honest, I have no idea.
That's right. And looking at these pictures, if there was a bed bug under that trash bag, we wouldn't know either.
No, I actually don't see what you're talking about, but I'll take your word for it.
Let's talk a little bit more about some bed bugs, Mr. Rogers. Now, you told us you're the property manager at Lakeside, right?
That's right. As my mug says right here, I am the world's best boss.
And as the world's best boss, you want to make sure any problems get solved.
Of course.
And Mr. Westermeyer told you he was having a bed bug issue, right?
That's right. His initial bed bug complaint was about a month after he moved in.
So you brought exterminators to Lakeside.
That's right.
Had him treat Mr. Westermeyer's apartment.
Well, Mr. Westermeyer actually turned away the exterminator the first time. They had to come back a couple days later. But yes, ma'am, they did eventually spray Mr. Westermeyer's apartment.
They did a spraying of the apartment, but I want to talk about what these exterminators might not have done. Now, to your knowledge, they never did a blacklight inspection of Mr. Westermeyer's unit.
I have no idea.
You didn't see them bring in canines to do an inspection either.
Well, I wasn't there.
Well, when you were there, you never saw them bring in big equipment to do a heat treatment?
No, I wasn't there when they went to do the initial inspection.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about heat treatments now. You actually recommended using a heat treatment to your boss.
That's right. I had heard from Blaine, who had then told Sam, who then, it was like a game of telephone. But yes, ma'am, I did eventually recommend that to Kai.
Let's talk about how Miss Walton responded when you recommended this to her. She cut you off.
That's right. She specifically was asking me if I knew how much it was going to cost. I didn't know at the time.
That's right. She asked you if you knew how much a heat treatment would cost her.
Yes, but not exactly in that tone. Again, she was actually asking me if I knew how much it was going to cost.
And then she told you she wasn't going to pay for one.
That's right. We didn't really see a need for it since we couldn't get into Mr. Westermeyer's apartment.
So yes, Mr. Rogers.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for your time today, Mr. Rogers. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Is there any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Rogers, did the plaintiff ever tell you what he was going to write a story about?
Well, you know, when I was talking to him after I had called him to let him know that, you know, he was past due on his rent, he didn't tell me exactly what the story was about, but he said that he was going to take Kieran down and how he couldn't wait to get this story to the papers.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Any recross examination?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. You may be excused.
Of course. Thank you.
Is there anything further from either party at this time?
No, the defense rests their case in chief, Your Honor.
Okay. I am not aware of a loss or where we are, although I assume we're maybe a little bit more on schedule. You all let me know what you want to do in terms of a break.
Whatever time permits, Your Honor, the defense would be amenable to a brief 5 to 10 minute break, of course, time permitting.
Your Honor, I do believe we have time for about a 5-minute break.
Okay. Is that okay? We will return in 5 minutes. I just asked that both attorneys who are performing cross-examination, I believe Counselor Ecker and Counselor Shea, just turn on your cameras when you're back in 5. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor.
The plaintiff is back and ready to go, Your Honor.
Thank you, Counselor Ecker.
As is the defense, Your Honor.
Thank you. Let me just check with the judges and make sure we are all back because I'm not quite sure what we'd do if we were not. Judge Victoria, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Judge Aronoff?
Yes, I'm here.
Judge Douglas?
I'm here.
Judge Coltsis?
I'm here. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Counselor Ecker, you may proceed.
May it please the court. The landlord didn't listen. I'm sure some of us have had the problems of a bad landlord before. Your apartment might have had a leaky faucet, broken shower curtain, an outlet that when you went to use it, just didn't work. Called your landlord, told him about the problem, never got fixed. Luckily though, for those kind of issues, while it's inconvenient, a bad landlord didn't put you into harm's way. But when your apartment becomes dangerous, unlivable through no fault of your own, and you tell your landlord about it, the law, it's pretty clear. The landlord has to listen. They're legally obligated to fix the problem. So what brings us to court. Trey Westermeyer has sued Kieran Walton for breach of the implied warranty of habitability. That suit comes a burden of proof, preponderance of the evidence. All that means is we had to show you it was more likely than not that Mr. Westermeyer's apartment became infested with bed bugs. Someone else is responsible for that infestation. That the landlord's response, it was unreasonable. Once we prove those three elements to you, the landlord is liable for both compensatory and punitive damages. The latter meant to punish the defendant. To prove our case, we ask that you kept in mind three simple questions. What happened to Mr. Westermeyer? Where did those bed bugs come from? Why was the landlord's response unreasonable? Well, let's walk through how we answered each one of those questions. And let's start with that first one. What happened to Mr. Westermeyer? He got bed bugs, plain and simple. Told his landlord about it. Problem never got fixed. Now, in his opening statement, Mr. DeVoe, he made you three different promises. Promised you Lakeside never had bed bugs. Promised you that there was no evidence of bed bugs. And then he promised you that Mr. Westermeyer was just trying to sell a story. So let's take those promises one by one. That first one, there was never any bed bugs at Lakeside. Well, not only did you hear from the entomologist that 3 different units had bed bugs, but you heard from their own exterminator. The unit number 12, right next to Mr. Westermeyer, had bed bugs in June of 2019. That was the first broken promise from Mr. DeVoe. Let's take a second promise. There's no evidence of bed bugs. You won't see any. Again, another broken promise because the entomologist showed you 3 clear signs of bed bugs. A picture of a bed bug both parties agree was there. And then like the entomologist told you, signs that there were bed bugs. That was Mr. DeVoe's second broken promise. Now his third promise that Mr. Westermeyer, he was just trying to sell a story. But members of the jury, you heard from 6 witnesses today, and they all live here in Midlands. How many of them ever told you that they read a story from Mr. Westermeyer about Miss Walton, about bedbugs? You heard from Mr. Westermeyer. He certainly never told you that he wrote a story, let alone sold one. Those are 3 promises and 3 broken promises from Mr. DeVoe because he wanted to distract you from the truth that Mr. Westermeyer had bed bugs. And when he told his landlord, I need some help on the rent, I'm dealing with these bed bugs, the landlord just didn't listen. Instead, Mr. Westermeyer was evicted. Let's talk about that second question. Where did these bed bugs come from? The neighboring units from Taylor Bauer, and that makes sense. Because witness after witness took the stand and told us the same thing. Mr. Bauer's apartment, it's disgusting. You saw pictures of it. With all that stuff there, it shouldn't surprise anyone. It certainly didn't surprise the exterminator when he told you in those crevices between all that stuff that he never inspected, there were probably pests. That's why the only expert you heard from today told you that bed bugs came from that unit and it infested Mr. Westermeyer. So let's talk about that final question. Why was the landlord's response unreasonable? Be realistic, they barely did anything. And the exterminator, he took the stand and told you the reason why they didn't do anything is because they didn't see a problem. But we know why that is too. He didn't do a proper inspection. Didn't do a blacklight inspection, didn't do a canine inspection. When he went there, he inspected the place in the dark. Members of the jury, that would be like going to the beach, looking for coins in the sand and not bringing a metal detector. Of course, you're not going to find anything. That explains why their response, it was lacking. You heard from the maintenance worker what they did. One inspection, one spray with something basically as good as Febreze. And when they sprayed that Febreze, they did it in the dark. That's unreasonable. That's why in deliberations, you'll be able to decide how much you want to punish the defendant through punitive damages. And for a billionaire like Miss Walton, we ask that that amount be no less than $500,000, because only that amount will ensure that the landlord finally listens to a very simple message. When your tenant has a problem, you can't just pretend like it's some story they're trying to sell. You actually have to fix it. Find Kieran Walton liable. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Ecker. Counselor Trey, you may proceed when you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Give me one moment to get set up. And can you hear and see me all right from this distance?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. May it please the court. Selling a story. Throughout today's trial, the plaintiff has been trying to sell you their story. Since Trey Westermeyer, the plaintiff, moved into Lakeside Apartments, he was searching for that story. One that would bring him money, fame, and maybe even a better job. The plaintiff finally found that story when they moved into Lakeside Apartments and they realized that their landowner, that their landlord was the wealthy and the famous Kai Walton. And the plaintiff, they had to continue to fabricate that story for you in court here today, when they were trying to sell you the story of a bedbug infestation in Unit 10 at Lakeside. But in court, stories can't just be told, they have to be proven. And the plaintiff, they had to prove theirs. They brought a claim of breach of contract against Miss Kai Walton, the contract in today's case being a lease agreement between the plaintiff and Miss Walton. And when you sign a lease, there's something called an implied warranty of habitability. And all that means is the landlord agrees that the apartment will remain livable for the tenant. And it was the plaintiff's job to prove that that was not the case in today's trial. Now, in order to prove that to you, they had to show you 4 main elements and prove all of them. First, they had to show you that there was a development of unsanitary conditions in Unit 10. Second, they had to show you that there was a reasonable notice of those conditions, if they existed, made to Miss Kai Walton. Third, they had to prove to you that there was a failure on Miss Walton's part to rectify and fix those conditions, again, if they existed. And members of the jury, they left out their 4th and final element that they had to prove. They also had to prove to you that the plaintiff, Mr. Trey Westermeyer, doesn't bear the primary responsibility for these conditions. They had to prove all of that to you by a preponderance of the evidence. And what that means is each of those elements they had to show you were more likely than not. Let's talk about how we know the plaintiff didn't meet that burden today. We know they couldn't, because all they're selling you in court today is just a story. First, let's talk about the plaintiff in today's case, Mr. Trey Westermeyer. Now, you might be asking yourself, why would Mr. Westermeyer want to sell me a story? You heard a lot about his profession, that he's a reporter. And you heard quote after quote from Mr. Westermeyer explaining the need for him to make money off a story he was planning to create, planning to write about Miss Walton. So let's talk about Mr. Westermeyer's own statements. On cross-examination, he admitted one of the last things he said to Miss Walton was a threat. He told her, once this story breaks, let's see how long you can keep your fortune. That lines up exactly with what Miss Walton told you. One of her last interactions with Mr. Westermeyer, as she said on the stand, was Trey walked up to her in the hallway, told her that he was going to expose her for a promotion at work. Those are the plaintiff's own words. And that's important, members of the jury, because it shows that Mr. Westermeyer wasn't concerned about his own health, his safety, or the cleanliness of his apartment. He was concerned about payday, about the check that awaited him at the end of today's trial. Now, all that lines up exactly with what Jesse Rogers told you, the property manager at Lakeside. He showed you that email he accidentally got sent, where the plaintiff admits he's trying to scrounge up money, and he thinks one of the best ways to do that would be writing a gotcha piece on his landlord. Keep in mind that email was sent weeks before Mr. Westermeyer ever even filed his first complaint for bedbugs. So we know that Mr. Westermeyer, he was gunning for that story long before he ever filed a complaint for bedbugs. He also told Mr. Rogers in person that he wanted to take Kieran down and that he would, quote, make more money than you've ever seen in your entire life. And my lawyers, they're going to get a big payday. Again, these are the plaintiff's own words. And once you read them, you recognize that the only reason he's in court today is to sell you that story and to get that payday. You also heard a lot about a bedbug infestation in today's case, and I want to talk about that infestation. I want you to ask yourself, what evidence did the plaintiff put in my hands that actually proved there was an infestation? They called Dr. Dennis Howe an expert in bugs, but what Dr. Howe had to admit to you on the stand is he's never stepped foot in Unit 10, 11, 12, or any apartment at Lakeside for that matter. All Dr. Howe had to rely on were photographs of a mattress and an outlet with some black spots on them given to him by Mr. Westermeyer. Dr. Howe had to admit these photos, they had no custodian, no chain of custody. He didn't know when they were taken, where, if in Unit 10 they were taken. And he admitted that if the plaintiff was lying, if these photos weren't actually of Unit 10, he wouldn't be able to verify them. And that's a big deal, members of the jury, because that's the only evidence the plaintiff has that there was ever a bedbug infestation in Unit 10. Now, I want to talk about some things the plaintiff just told you. They told you that the landlord, Ms. Kai Walton, in today's case, didn't listen. I want you to ask yourself, how is that true? Because the day Mr. Westermeyer filed his first complaint for bedbugs, Ms. Walton, who manages dozens of properties around this state, went to his door that same day and told him, let's get our people on this, let's fix this. The very next morning, 8:30 a.m., the first appointment he can pencil Mr. Westermeyer in for, Blaine Crawford goes to his door and he's denied entry. He tries next month. He's denied entry. Mr. Crawford tries 5 more times over the span of 8 months, and Mr. Westermeyer doesn't let him in a single time. Why? Well, the truth was revealed when Mr. Crawford could finally get into that apartment when the plaintiff wasn't there. And what did he find, members of the jury? Not one bedbug. Dead, alive, no black or brown spots in any of the parts that those photos the plaintiff wants you to care so much about showed. He couldn't find a single bug. And that's because there was no bedbug infestation. There's no bug infestation because the plaintiff is just selling you a story, and their asking price for it is $500,000 and Kai Walton's reputation in this community. Find her not liable. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Fay. Is there a rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Again, Mr. Shea just told us that Mr. Westermeyer is just telling a story. But let's think about the story that Mr. Shea is trying to sell us. Mr. Westermeyer has a bed bug in his apartment. Both sides can agree on it. But he just found that out of nowhere, bags it up, lets that bed bug bite his daughter, sends the person that he loves most to live with his father. And then, by some miraculous coincidence, 2 other apartments are infested with bed bugs at Lakeside. Their own exterminator confirmed that. Members of the jury, all for a story that we never even heard Mr. Westermeyer wrote, let alone sold. Mr. Shea's explanation of the facts, his story, you wouldn't believe that if you read it in a book, let alone in court. It's because the truth, it's much more simple. Mr. Westermeyer got bed bugs, his apartment became infested, told his landlord about it, but the landlord didn't listen. Find Kieran Walton liable. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. At this time, we'll just allow a